Hello and welcome. Today, we're gonna drive a tank. No, not that kind of tank. This kind of tank.
Tank is a sub-brand of Great Wall Motor, makers of everything from the Cat electric hatchback to the GWM Power pickup truck. With Tank, they set out to make a 4x4 SUV brand that also added a bit of luxury to the mix.
I can't really say that the Tank 300 looks luxurious, but I can say it meets one of my biggest requirements for a 4x4, and that's looking very tough. Then again, with a brand name like Tank, they couldn't put out some jelly bean shaped champagne-colored SUV and just call it a day. Speaking of the Tank brand, I gotta say, this Tank logo, yeah, it looks like a Tesla logo drawn by a 4-year-old.
The whole design has hints of the Bronco and the Wrangler, as well as the classic BJ212. In profile, the Tank 300 has the massive fender flares and boxy proportions that I love to see in my 4x4s. Everything is chunky, from the side mirrors to the running boards.
Another thing this car has that I love to see on a 4x4, side opening door, which is really heavy, by the way, because of this spare tire. According to our back of the napkin calculations, this thing has about 800 liters of space thanks to its square shape and high roof. That's less than the 900 liters of a Jeep Wrangler. However, this thing measures 4.76 meters in length. That's about 12 centimeters or around 4 inches shorter than a Wrangler.
Official pricing for the Tank 300 is around $28,000 to $33,000 US. That's less than half the starting price of a Jeep Wrangler here in China.
It might not look like a luxury car outside, but the interior of the Tank 300, well, it seems to fit the ticket, at least at first glance. That's because it looks a lot like a Mercedes-Benz G-Class, particularly the way that the twin 12.3-inch displays are arranged here on the dashboard, as well as the very Mercedes-like air vents. Once you start to touch things, however, you realize that this thing only looks like a Mercedes-Benz G-Class. It doesn't feel like a Mercedes-Benz G-Class. Material qualities are acceptable for something that costs less than $30,000 US. Material quality might not be mind-blowing, but Tank does something very smart, which is they make sure that the plastics are not just regular black plastic. They'll have a certain interesting pattern to them in most cases. Here on the center console, for example, and up here on the dashboard as well. Material quality aside, there are some interesting design elements that I want to point out here on the interior. Take, for example, this knob-looking thing between the two air vents. It's actually where they display the buttons to control the air conditioning. In the center is a little clock. On higher trim models, this is where they put the seat heater buttons. My favorite design element, however, is definitely this transmission lever, which looks like something that would have been designed by H.R. Giger, the guy who designed the Xenomorph from Aliens. There's not much to talk about when it comes to the rear of the Tank 300, other than to say there is a pretty decent, more than a pretty decent amount of headroom, especially right here. There's a big bump here, so watch out for that. There's also pretty good legroom. I have the seat adjusted pretty far forward, but even with it adjusted for a taller person, there's still at least a fist or a fist and a half of space available. Down here, we have 2 USB ports, traditional Type A's that is, and fold down armrest with cup holders.
The Tank 300 is a traditional body-on-frame SUV and can be equipped with front and rear locking diffs and real-time 4-wheel drive with low range. Maximum ground clearance is 224 millimeters or about 9 inches, and it has a maximum wading depth of 700 millimeters or about 27.5 inches. Stock approach and departure angles are an impressive 33 and 34 degrees respectively. It also has available trail turn, which locks up one of the rear tires in order to decrease the vehicle's turning radius.
When you put all that together, it sounds like a vehicle that will be very capable off-road now, doesn't it? But we're not going to be driving it off-road. That's because the person we rented it from made it very clear we were not allowed to do that. They're a fan of the show, by the way, and they did tell us that they don't actually drive it off-road themselves. Then again, a bunch of other media have already driven this car off-road. If you want to see what that's like, go watch one of their videos. We are going to do something they weren't able to do though. We are going to drive it on-road. The thing about 4x4s like the Jeep Wrangler is that they are dominating off-road and borderline punishing on-road. That's because they use old school technology like solid front axles in order to achieve that off-road performance. With the Tank 300, it seems clear that the brand decided to prioritize on-road feel over the extremes of off-road performance. That's why they chose to use a multi-link or double wishbone front suspension. While a double wishbone front suspension can't achieve the extreme levels of flex that a solid axle can, it does deliver a much better combination of ride and handling. When it comes to the ride, I would say that this thing definitely drives more like a traditional or a more modern SUV versus the Wrangler. That means that going over low speed obstacles like speed bumps, for example, doesn't feel quite so jarring as it does in the Jeep.
Under the hood is a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder making 167 kilowatts and 387 newton-meters of torque. That's 225 horsepower and 286 pound-feet. Backing that up is a smooth shifting 8-speed ZF automatic.
There was some talk of putting a 3-liter turbocharged V6 in this thing when it debuted, but so far that's still only available in the much larger Tank 500. With the 2-liter engine, its official 0 to 100 km/h time is a shall we say, pretty darn slow 9.5 seconds. Considerably slower than a Wrangler. And how about handling? Well, the Jeep doesn't really set a high bar in that regard, but this car definitely exceeds it by quite a bit. It doesn't have really amazing body control or anything, but it's about as good as you would expect it to be for a car that's this high off the ground. One of the big advantages it has over the Jeep and many other 4x4s is the fact that it has relatively good steering feel. It's not completely vague. You can feel the steering weight up as you go into corners, and it's actually pretty easy to control. Even this base off-road version of the Tank 300, there is, for the record, a city version that forgoes the locking diffs but keeps the part-time four-wheel drive. Even it comes standard with ACC, or adaptive cruise control. Higher versions, or higher trim levels rather, they have adaptive cruise control plus lane keep assist. This thing also comes standard with a 360-degree camera that serves as a live feed for when you're off-roading. So what do we get when we put all this together? Well, we get a car that drives more comfortably on the road than a Jeep Wrangler, but also has better technology, especially when it comes to the lower trim levels. Let's face it, this thing's exterior styling is basically a mashup of a Jeep Wrangler, a Ford Bronco, and a Beijing BJ212. The inside, well, it looks like a cheaper version of a Mercedes-Benz G-Class, but it's also a car that comes standard with a locking rear diff, adaptive cruise control, part-time four-wheel drive, trail turn, and a bunch of other stuff for less than $30,000 US. And that is pretty cool.